The night was alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft glow of chandeliers that seemed to float above the enormous hall. The mansion, perched on the hill, looked more like a palace than a home. Outside, the gardens were illuminated with soft golden lights, and fountains sparkled under the moonlight. Inside, the elite of society mingled in elegant gowns and tailored suits, exchanging compliments, gossip, and secret glances. Music floated gently from a small string ensemble in the corner, filling the room with a sense of grandeur. Among the crowd, a young waitress moved quickly and quietly, balancing trays of champagne and delicacies. She wore a simple black uniform, nothing like the sparkling dresses and expensive suits surrounding her. She had been working in the hospitality world for years, but tonight she felt particularly out of place. Not because she didn't belong, but because she was surrounded by people who often judged too quickly, people who thought money and status could measure talent, worth, or even kindness. She kept her head low, offering polite smiles and gentle nods whenever someone noticed her, though most were too busy with themselves to care. The millionaire, the host of the evening, was a man of immense wealth and even greater arrogance. His presence was impossible to ignore. Every step he took drew attention, and every word he spoke carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed and admired. He was wearing an expensive tailored suit, and his smile had that slightly mocking edge that made people both laugh and feel uneasy at the same time. He enjoyed being the center of attention and thrived on the reactions of others, especially when he could control them. Tonight, he had invited his friends, business partners, and some socialites, all eager to see the entertainment he had promised. He prided himself on offering amusement that no one else could, and tonight he had decided to play a little game that he thought would be harmless fun. The string ensemble had paused for a moment, and all eyes turned toward a large, polished grand piano that stood in the corner. Its black lacquered surface gleamed under the lights, as if waiting for someone worthy to touch its keys. Most guests noticed it only as a decoration, another symbol of wealth. But to the waitress, it stirred a memory, one buried deep inside her. A love for music that had been her constant companion through years of long nights and hard work. She hadn't touched a piano in public for years, only in the quiet moments at home, practicing the melodies she carried in her heart. The millionaire, noticing the piano and the young waitress standing nearby, suddenly had an idea. His eyes sparkled with mischief. It would be entertaining, he thought, to force someone unexpected to perform, just for the reactions of his elite guests. He called her over with a sharp clap of his hands, his voice booming across the hall. The guests turned, some with curiosity, some with amusement, ready to see what he was planning. The young waitress froze for a moment, her heart racing. She had been invisible all evening, blending into the background, and now all attention was on her. The weight of the gaze of so many people, all rich, confident, and self-assured, pressed down on her. "Come here," the millionaire said, gesturing toward the piano. "You, yes you, play something for us. Let's see if you have any talent at all. If you can, maybe I'll even reward you." There was laughter from some guests, sharp and mocking, as if this was already proving how foolish she would look. The young waitress felt a mix of panic and determination. She had never sought recognition, but she could not let fear control her. She took a deep breath, remembering the countless times she had played in the privacy of her small apartment, fingers gliding over the keys, letting her soul speak through music. Slowly, she approached the grand piano, her footsteps careful but steady. The guests leaned forward in their chairs, whispers filling the space between them. Some exchanged smirks, expecting a performance that would be clumsy and embarrassing. The millionaire's grin widened. He was sure of the humiliation he was about to enjoy. The young waitress looked down at the keys, feeling the cool touch beneath her fingertips. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the memory of every practice, every melody, and every moment of silent joy guide her. She reminded herself that music was not about applause, status, or ridicule. It was about expression, about courage, about beauty. The room waited. Glasses were forgotten in hands, conversations paused, and the string ensemble looked on silently. Even the millionaire, who thrived on control and spectacle, seemed momentarily still, sensing that what was about to happen could defy his expectations. The young waitress placed her hands on the keys, her fingers trembling slightly, but not with fear, more with anticipation. She took another deep breath, and as she did, the first note emerged, pure and clear, cutting through the quiet like a small ray of light. The sound surprised everyone, delicate yet commanding, unexpected in its precision and beauty. The room felt different now, alive in a way it hadn't been before. Eyes widened, whispers ceased, and all that remained was the music flowing from her fingers. As she continued, her movements grew more confident, each note carrying emotion, each chord telling a story. The laughter that had filled the room moments ago vanished, replaced by a reverent silence. The guests were captivated, leaning forward, their earlier arrogance replaced by awe. The millionaire, who had intended to mock her, felt a sudden shift within himself. His smugness faded, replaced by astonishment and a hint of regret. He had expected to entertain his guests at her expense, but instead, he found himself witnessing something extraordinary. In that moment, the young waitress was no longer just a servant in the eyes of the guests. She was an artist, a storyteller, someone who could command attention without arrogance, without needing wealth or power to validate her talent. The grand piano, once a symbol of status, now became a bridge between her hidden world and the astonished crowd. She played with grace, confidence, and heart, showing that true skill often lies where it is least expected. And as the last note lingered in the air, the room remained silent for a heartbeat longer than necessary, everyone caught in the afterglow of the unexpected beauty they had witnessed. The millionaire, for the first time that night, felt humbled, realizing that mocking others for entertainment could backfire in ways he had never imagined. The young waitress, though nervous, felt a quiet pride, knowing she had shared a piece of herself, and that for a moment, everyone had stopped to truly see and hear her. The night, which had begun as another display of wealth and control, had transformed into a celebration of hidden talent and unexpected courage, and the memory of that moment would linger in the mansion long after the last guest had left. The room was filled with an expectant silence as the young waitress sat at the grand piano. Her heart was still racing from the sudden attention, but she took a deep breath and reminded herself of the countless hours she had spent practicing in secret. She had never performed in front of anyone outside her home, and now, with dozens of wealthy and judgmental eyes on her, the stakes felt higher than ever. Yet, there was a quiet strength inside her, a belief that music was meant to be shared, and that confidence grew as she prepared to take the first real step into the light. The millionaire, standing with his arms crossed and a smirk on his face, leaned casually against a marble pillar. He was sure this would be entertaining. The young waitress, nervous as she was, could not fail in his mind. She was just a girl from nowhere, dressed in a simple uniform, and certainly not someone capable of producing anything remarkable. Around him, the guests chuckled softly, exchanging glances that were half curiosity, half mockery. They were all ready for a show, expecting embarrassment. Yet the young waitress focused on the keys, her fingers hovering above them as if they belonged to her, her connection to them silent but unbreakable. A faint tremble ran through her fingers at first, but she pushed it aside, allowing muscle memory and memory of music to guide her. She thought of her mother, who had encouraged her from a young age to follow her passion. She remembered quiet evenings at home, the way her fingers could make a melody bloom even on the simplest of pianos. That memory grounded her. She realized that this wasn't about proving herself to the millionaire or the guests. It was about expressing something that had always lived inside her, something that could not be judged by wealth or social status. The millionaire cleared his throat loudly. "Come on," he said, his tone dripping with amusement. "Let's hear what you've got. Don't waste my time." His voice carried through the hall, drawing even more attention to her. She felt a flash of fear, but she did not let it control her. She lifted her chin and met his gaze for a fleeting moment, a silent challenge passing between them. Then she turned back to the piano, letting her hands find the first keys, the first notes of a piece that she had played countless times in the quiet of her small apartment. As the first chord rang out, soft but confident, the room seemed to change. The light chatter died down, and even the string ensemble paused, unsure whether to continue or simply watch. The guests leaned forward, their laughter fading into curiosity. The young waitress's fingers moved with growing assurance, each note carefully chosen yet flowing naturally, as if the piano were an extension of her soul. She was no longer just a server. She was a storyteller, conveying emotion and depth through sound. The millionaire's smirk faltered slightly. He had expected awkwardness, maybe a few wrong notes. Instead, what filled the room was a delicate harmony, precise and evocative. It was clear that she was more than competent. She was exceptional. Guests exchanged looks of surprise and disbelief, some whispering quietly to one another. No one had expected such talent from someone so seemingly ordinary. Her performance was not just skillful, it was compelling, carrying a sense of honesty that money and status could never buy. As the melody developed, the young waitress allowed herself to feel the music fully. Each note became more confident than the last, her hands dancing across the keys with fluidity and emotion. She played a piece she had composed herself, one that told a story of hardship, dreams, and quiet perseverance. It was personal, yet universal, touching everyone in the room without a single word. Some guests could feel tears pricking their eyes, not out of sadness, but out of awe. They were witnessing someone rise above circumstance, someone whose talent and passion could not be ignored. The millionaire shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the spectacle he had intended for amusement had become something else entirely. His eyes darted from the waitress to the guests and back, noticing the genuine admiration on their faces. He felt an unfamiliar pang of humility. This was not about wealth, influence, or social hierarchy. It was about raw, undeniable talent. He had thought he controlled the room, that he could dictate what would entertain them. Now he had no control. He could only watch and listen, caught in the brilliance of someone he had underestimated. Around the room, conversations had ceased entirely. All attention was focused on the young waitress and the piano. The subtle sound of the notes filled every corner, wrapping around the chandelier-lit walls, the polished floors, and the grand marble pillars. It was as though time had slowed, the noise and chatter of the party fading into the background. Every guest was captivated, leaning closer, forgetting their preconceived notions, their judgments, their hierarchy of wealth and status. They were simply listening, fully present in a moment that none of them had expected. The young waitress's confidence grew with each passing second. She realized that this moment was hers to own, not because she wanted to prove the millionaire wrong, but because she wanted to share her love for music, a love that had always been her refuge and her companion. She allowed herself a small smile, a quiet acknowledgement of the courage it took to step forward despite fear. She played not for reward, not for praise, but for the truth of the music itself. As the piece reached its climax, the notes soared with a mix of intensity and grace, creating a rich tapestry of sound that seemed almost impossible for someone so young and so unassuming to produce. The guests sat in stunned silence, some holding their breath, others letting the music wash over them like a wave. The millionaire, now visibly shaken, could not hide his astonishment. His earlier amusement had vanished completely, replaced by a deep respect that he had not expected to feel. He realized that he had underestimated her, and in that moment, a lesson in humility quietly settled in his mind. Finally, the young waitress concluded the piece with a gentle, lingering chord that hung in the air like a soft echo. The silence lasted a heartbeat longer than necessary, as if the room itself were savoring the last note. Then, slowly, a ripple of applause began, starting quietly and building into a wave of appreciation that filled the hall. Guests rose from their seats, clapping enthusiastically, some cheering softly, others in awe of what they had just witnessed. The millionaire clapped as well, but it was different from the others. His applause was tinged with realization, an acknowledgement that he had been wrong to expect ridicule, that talent and heart could never be mocked successfully. The young waitress sat back for a moment, catching her breath, her hands resting lightly on the keys. She felt a mixture of relief, pride, and wonder at what had just happened. For a brief moment, the world had shifted around her, and she had become the center not through wealth or influence, but through sheer skill and authenticity. The elite gathering had been transformed, and everyone present had been reminded that brilliance can come from unexpected places, and that humility is often the companion of true talent. The millionaire finally spoke, his voice quieter, less commanding, but sincere. "That was extraordinary," he admitted, glancing at her with a hint of newfound respect. "I didn't expect that." The young waitress nodded politely, offering a gentle smile, her composure intact despite the adrenaline and nerves that had coursed through her just moments before. The guests continued to clap, some leaning over to exchange impressed glances, murmuring quietly about the surprising turn of events. In that moment, the young waitress realized something important. Talent alone could command attention, respect, and admiration, even in a world that often valued wealth above everything else. She had shared her gift, not for recognition, not for praise, but simply because it was a part of who she was. And for that, she had earned something far greater than money or status. She had earned the acknowledgement of those who had doubted her, and the quiet pride that comes from stepping into the light and embracing one's true self. The applause had barely begun to fade when the young waitress felt a calm settle over her, an unexpected serenity that allowed her to play with even more freedom. The initial notes had been careful, measured, almost cautious, but now, she felt the music flow through her as if it had always been a part of the room. The piano no longer felt like an obstacle or a test. It was an extension of her emotions, her experiences, and her dreams. Every chord, every subtle movement of her fingers carried meaning, telling a story that words could never capture. The millionaire, still standing near the marble pillar, could hardly take his eyes off her. He had been confident, arrogant, certain that the moment would be a source of amusement for himself and his friends. But the longer she played, the more he realized that he was witnessing something beyond his control. The skill, the emotion, the quiet power behind her performance defied everything he had anticipated. His arms, once crossed smugly, now hung at his sides, a subtle tension in his posture betraying his surprise. He glanced around at his guests, noting their reactions. The smiles were genuine, the awe unmistakable, and he felt a mix of envy and admiration stirring in him. Guests who had been whispering moments ago now sat in rapt attention. Some had leaned back, mouths slightly open, while others had leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the young woman as her fingers danced across the keys. The music seemed to reach into the corners of the grand hall, touching everyone in a personal way. It was more than just skill. It was a presence, a voice without words, a story told through melody. Even the string ensemble, who had been performing earlier, had stopped playing, recognizing that this moment belonged entirely to her. As the young waitress moved through the piece, her confidence grew. She no longer felt the weight of judgment or expectation. Instead, she felt a connection to everyone in the room, a shared understanding through the language of music. Each note she played reflected her journey, the struggles, the quiet victories, the countless hours spent in solitude learning and perfecting her craft. She remembered late nights alone at home, practicing the same melodies until her fingers ached, driven by passion rather than recognition. That dedication, unseen and unacknowledged until now, radiated from her performance. The millionaire's expression had softened, though his eyes were wide with disbelief. He had believed that wealth and status could intimidate, that power could control the narrative of any room, and yet here he was powerless to command attention or elicit mockery. He felt an unfamiliar vulnerability, a recognition that talent and heart could not be diminished by arrogance or ridicule. It was a lesson unfolding in real time, and he could not look away. Around the room, subtle signs of amazement appeared everywhere. Some guests were leaning forward, heads slightly tilted, as if trying to capture every nuance of the music. Others had their hands clasped, fingers drumming lightly in rhythm, caught up in the emotion of the moment. A few discreetly wiped at eyes that had grown moist with the beauty of the performance. Even the servants, who had been quietly observing from the edges of the room, seemed captivated, their usual movements halted by the extraordinary display. The young waitress felt the music swell within her, her body moving naturally with the rhythm, each note connecting to the next as if forming a conversation with the audience. She allowed herself to improvise slightly, letting intuition guide her fingers in ways that were both unexpected and harmonious. The audience, sensing the spontaneity, responded unconsciously, leaning in, nodding, and letting themselves be carried along by the flow. The millionaire, attempting to maintain composure, could only watch as the room's attention and energy shifted entirely toward her. In the middle of the performance, she introduced a subtle variation, a soft, melancholic melody that seemed to speak directly to the hearts of the listeners. The room became quieter, almost reverent, as if the music had woven an invisible thread connecting everyone in shared emotion. Some guests instinctively closed their eyes, letting the sound fill their minds. Others glanced at one another, exchanging looks of disbelief and wonder. The millionaire, for the first time that evening, realized that wealth and status were powerless here. Only the music mattered, and it belonged to her. As the piece progressed, the waitress moved into a faster, more dynamic section, her fingers flying across the keys with precision and confidence. The notes soared, playful and expressive, showcasing her technical skill and deep understanding of musical expression. The contrast between the soft, emotional passages and the lively, intricate sections highlighted her versatility and control. Guests gasped quietly, caught between amazement and admiration. The millionaire felt a mix of pride and humiliation. Pride in the undeniable talent he was witnessing, humiliation in knowing that he had intended to use this moment for mockery and had completely misjudged her. The music began to build toward its climax, a powerful, sweeping section that filled the room with energy and emotion. The young waitress allowed herself to be fully present, her mind and heart entirely immersed in the performance. She could feel the audience responding, not through words, but through the subtle energy that pulsed in the room. Applause broke out spontaneously in some corners, though she continued to play, letting the finale arrive naturally rather than rushing it for effect. The millionaire watched, torn between disbelief and admiration, as she transformed a moment of potential humiliation into a triumph that no one could ignore. The final chords rang out, each note lingering in the air, vibrating with clarity and resonance. The room seemed to hold its breath for a heartbeat longer, as if reluctant to let the magic end. Then, slowly, the guests erupted into applause, some standing, others clapping enthusiastically, while expressing their astonishment in quiet murmurs. The millionaire, still absorbing what had happened, joined in, clapping with genuine admiration, a rare smile breaking across his face. He realized that his initial plan had failed spectacularly, yet the outcome had been far greater than he could have anticipated. He had wanted entertainment at someone else's expense, but instead, he had witnessed the creation of something beautiful and unforgettable. The young waitress, her hands still resting on the keys, allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. Her chest rose and fell with relief and pride. She looked up, taking in the room, seeing expressions of awe, respect, and admiration on faces that had moments ago been ready to ridicule her. She felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond applause or recognition. She had shared a part of herself that had always been private, and in doing so, she had earned the silent respect of an entire room of strangers. The millionaire, standing nearby, nodded slightly, acknowledging not just her skill but her courage and composure under pressure. As the applause continued, she rose from the piano, bowing lightly to the audience. There was no arrogance in her gesture, only gratitude and humility. The guests responded with further applause, some cheering quietly, others whispering to one another about the extraordinary performance they had just witnessed. The millionaire, though still processing the events, stepped forward, his tone quieter and more sincere than before. "That was remarkable," he said, looking directly at her. "I did not expect anything like that." She nodded politely, offering a small smile, feeling a quiet sense of vindication but not arrogance. The moment belonged to the music, to the courage it took to play, and to the connection that had formed between her and everyone in the room. The young waitress walked away from the piano, her heart still pounding but her mind clear. She had faced a test she never sought and had emerged with grace and confidence. The millionaire, reflecting on his actions, realized that the evening had become more than a party. It had become a lesson in humility, talent, and the unexpected power of courage. The guests, now buzzing with admiration and awe, had been reminded that brilliance could come from anyone, anywhere, and that wealth and status could not overshadow skill or heart. And in that grand hall, amidst the chandeliers, polished floors, and opulent surroundings, one young waitress had turned a moment meant for ridicule into a triumph that would be remembered long after the music had ended. The young waitress felt a quiet strength settle over her as she continued to play, the music flowing through her fingers like a river that had no end. Each note seemed to carry a fragment of her soul, every chord a reflection of her dreams, struggles, and quiet triumphs. She no longer felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her. The audience, the millionaire, the whispers and stares, all of it had faded into the background. In its place was a shared experience, a connection between her and everyone in the grand hall, built through the language of music. The guests, once skeptical and judgmental, now watched with wide eyes and open hearts. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to admiration, from smirks to awe. Some leaned forward, unable to tear their eyes away, while others sat back, letting the music wash over them and resonate deeply. They had come expecting entertainment at someone else's expense, but instead, they found themselves swept up in an unexpected performance that touched their emotions in ways they had not anticipated. Even the string ensemble, who had paused earlier, now watched silently, acknowledging that the moment was entirely hers. The millionaire, who had orchestrated this moment with amusement in mind, felt a complex mix of emotions: surprise, awe, humility, and even a quiet sense of regret mingled together. He had expected ridicule, a brief spectacle that would amuse his friends and affirm his sense of control. Instead, he found himself witnessing talent and courage that could not be diminished by wealth, status, or mockery. He shifted slightly, his posture loosening, realizing that the young waitress had taken something meant for her humiliation and turned it into a demonstration of grace and power. There was no room for arrogance here. Only the truth of her skill could command attention. As the music progressed, the young waitress began to explore subtle variations in rhythm and tone. She allowed herself to improvise gently, guided by intuition and emotion rather than strict adherence to any particular piece. Each note became a conversation, each chord a reflection of her journey. She remembered the quiet nights at home, practicing tirelessly when no one was watching, and the small victories that had built her confidence over time. Those memories infused her performance with authenticity, and the audience responded without knowing why. They were moved, not simply by skill, but by the honesty and depth that radiated from every note. The atmosphere in the hall grew more charged as the performance reached its middle section. The music became more dynamic, shifting seamlessly between soft, delicate passages and powerful, soaring sequences. The young waitress's fingers danced across the keys with precision and elegance, yet there was an unmistakable warmth to every touch. The notes carried emotion, painting pictures of resilience, hope, and the quiet beauty found in unexpected places. Guests who had come with preconceived notions found those assumptions shattered, replaced by genuine appreciation and admiration. The millionaire's eyes never left her. He had never experienced anything like this before, and he could feel the power of humility mixed with talent confronting his own arrogance. His laughter from earlier in the evening seemed distant, almost foreign, as he watched her transform a moment of potential embarrassment into a triumph of artistry. He noticed subtle details, the graceful movements of her hands, the way her posture reflected both confidence and modesty, the way her presence commanded attention without demanding it. He realized that true talent was not about showing off or asserting dominance. It was about connection, expression, and courage. Around the room, whispers of admiration began to spread quietly. Some guests exchanged glances, acknowledging silently that they had underestimated her. Others seemed lost in thought, absorbed in the emotional resonance of the music. Even those who had been the most skeptical, preparing for a laugh at her expense, found themselves captivated and, in some cases, humbled. It was a rare and transformative moment, the kind that lingered in memory long after it had passed. The young waitress allowed the music to flow naturally, moving into a section that was both intricate and emotive. Her hands moved with agility and purpose, each note deliberate yet filled with feeling. The room seemed to vibrate with the energy of her performance, the music creating a shared experience that transcended social barriers. She could sense the collective breath of the audience, the subtle shifts in posture and expression as they absorbed every nuance. The hall, grand and opulent, seemed to shrink around the intimacy of the moment, bringing everyone together in silent witness to her talent. The millionaire, increasingly aware of the depth of her skill, felt a mixture of awe and introspection. He realized that this performance was not just about impressing others. It was about demonstrating courage, authenticity, and the ability to rise above expectation. He had sought entertainment, but he had found inspiration. His mind wandered briefly to his own life, the ways in which arrogance and privilege had shielded him from recognizing true talent. He felt a subtle shift within himself, a recognition that respect and admiration could not be demanded. They had to be earned, often in ways that were completely unexpected. As the music approached its emotional peak, the young waitress allowed herself to fully immerse in the performance. Her movements were fluid, her focus unwavering, and her expression serene yet passionate. Each note resonated not just in the hall, but in the hearts of those listening. The guests responded instinctively, some sitting in stunned silence, others leaning closer to catch every detail, their eyes reflecting amazement and appreciation. The millionaire, watching her, felt a quiet humility settle over him, an acknowledgement that he had misjudged the situation entirely. In the final moments of the performance, the young waitress introduced a soft, lingering melody that contrasted beautifully with the previous intensity. It was gentle yet powerful, a delicate balance that showcased her technical skill and emotional depth. The audience was mesmerized, completely captivated by the artistry unfolding before them. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, reluctant to let go of the moment, suspended in a shared sense of awe and wonder. As the last note faded, silence enveloped the hall for a brief, perfect moment. Then, as if released from a spell, the guests erupted into applause. Some stood, clapping enthusiastically, while others whispered their admiration to one another. The sound was overwhelming yet respectful, a tribute to the skill and courage of the young waitress. The millionaire joined in, his applause genuine and tinged with humility. He had set out to create a spectacle at someone else's expense, but he had been given something far more profound, a reminder of the transformative power of talent, courage, and authenticity. The young waitress rose from the piano, her movements graceful and composed. She offered a polite bow, acknowledging the audience without arrogance. Her heart was racing, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had shared her gift fully and honestly. The applause continued, a testament to the impact she had made, and the guests gradually settled, still talking in hushed tones about the unexpected brilliance they had witnessed. The millionaire approached her cautiously, his expression a mixture of respect and lingering surprise. "That was remarkable," he said softly, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "I did not expect anything like that." The young waitress nodded politely, her smile modest but sincere. She had not sought recognition or praise, yet she could not deny the quiet pride she felt. The evening, once a display of wealth and status, had transformed into a celebration of talent, courage, and authenticity, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. As the guests began to relax and return to their conversations, the young waitress stepped back from the piano, her mind still buzzing with the adrenaline and emotion of the performance. She had faced fear and uncertainty, had been thrust into the spotlight without warning, and had emerged with grace and confidence. The experience had reaffirmed a truth she had long known. Talent, when nurtured with dedication and shared with courage, could transcend expectation, break down barriers, and touch the hearts of those who witnessed it. The night, which had begun with mockery and skepticism, had become a testament to the power of authenticity and the enduring impact of courage and skill. The final chord still lingered in the grand hall, vibrating softly as if reluctant to leave the air. The applause had begun, and yet, a sense of awe remained, quiet but profound. The young waitress sat for a moment at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, letting the echoes of the last note settle. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of the music and the adrenaline still coursing through her. She had shared something personal, something that had been a part of her for years, and now, the room reflected it back with an intensity she had never imagined. The millionaire, who had orchestrated this moment with the intent of ridicule, was frozen in thought. He had expected a clumsy performance, a few wrong notes, perhaps even some laughter from the guests. Instead, he had witnessed an exhibition of skill, grace, and heart that left him momentarily speechless. The initial smugness that had colored his expressions was gone, replaced by a quiet respect. He realized he had underestimated the young waitress completely, and that recognition stirred something unfamiliar within him, a mixture of humility and admiration. Around the room, the reactions were varied but unified in their astonishment. Some guests had risen to their feet, clapping and cheering, their expressions reflecting genuine amazement. Others were still seated, their eyes wide, absorbing every detail, as if trying to understand how someone so unassuming could produce something so extraordinary. The whispers that had circulated moments before about her appearance and background had vanished, replaced by quiet discussions of talent and the beauty of the performance. It was as if the room had been reshaped in those few minutes, with respect and admiration taking the place of judgment and expectation. The young waitress slowly rose from the piano bench, her movements graceful and composed. She gave a small, modest bow to the audience, acknowledging their applause without seeking to dominate or control their reaction. Her eyes scanned the room briefly, catching glimpses of people who had been ready to mock her but were now captivated and respectful. It was a strange sensation, to be seen and appreciated in a way that transcended social status or wealth. She felt proud, but not boastful, humbled, but empowered. The music had done what words could not, bridging the divide between her world and theirs. The millionaire stepped forward, his posture still slightly tense, a mixture of disbelief and admiration in his gaze. He was no longer the orchestrator of mockery, but a witness to something far greater. "That was extraordinary," he said, his voice quieter than usual, stripped of the arrogance that had marked him all evening. "I didn't expect any of this." His words carried sincerity, and for the first time he acknowledged that his perception had been flawed. He had judged based on appearances and status, and he had been completely wrong. Guests turned to one another, murmuring their agreement and adding their voices to the collective recognition of her talent. Some discreetly offered compliments, others shared quiet smiles of acknowledgement. The string ensemble, who had paused during her performance, now resumed playing softly, providing a gentle accompaniment that underscored the impact of the moment. Even the staff, who had observed from the sidelines, exchanged glances of admiration and whispered praise, recognizing that they had witnessed something exceptional. The young waitress felt a mixture of relief and pride, her emotions tempered by humility. She had faced a challenge she never sought, performed under scrutiny she had not anticipated, and emerged with grace and confidence. It was a validation of years of quiet dedication, of hours spent practicing alone when no one was watching, of a love for music that had been her refuge and companion. She realized that courage did not always come from defiance. Sometimes, it was simply the decision to share what was within, to trust in one's own abilities, and to let them shine. The millionaire, reflecting on his earlier intentions, felt a subtle shift in perspective. He had sought entertainment at her expense, assuming control and expecting humiliation. Instead, he had witnessed something that could not be manipulated or diminished. he was forced to confront the limitations of his own assumptions, recognizing that wealth and social position were irrelevant in the face of genuine talent and courage. The experience had humbled him, and in that humility, he found a sense of admiration that was both new and enlightening. As the applause continued, the young waitress took a few steps back from the piano, her gaze softening as she observed the faces of those around her. She saw genuine amazement, respect, and even inspiration in their eyes. Some guests quietly shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered to one another about the unexpected brilliance of her performance. The room, once filled with chatter and social posturing, had been transformed into a space of shared appreciation, a moment of collective recognition for skill and authenticity. The young waitress allowed herself a brief smile, acknowledging the impact of the moment without seeking further attention. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had conveyed a part of herself that had always been private, and that the audience had responded in kind. It was a rare and precious experience, one that transcended the superficial markers of status, wealth, or appearance. For a few minutes, the world had been aligned around talent, heart, and courage, and she had been at the center of it. The millionaire approached her once more, this time with a subtle nod of respect. "Truly remarkable," he said, his voice carrying a sense of sincerity and recognition that had been absent before. "You have a gift, and you've shown it beautifully tonight." There was no mockery, no condescension, only genuine acknowledgement of her skill and bravery. The young waitress nodded in return, offering a modest smile, her heart steady despite the adrenaline that still lingered. She had faced fear, expectation, and judgment, and she had emerged with dignity and grace. The audience continued to react, some still standing, some resuming their seats but speaking quietly about the performance they had witnessed. The hall, with its chandeliers, marble floors, and opulent surroundings, had been transformed by the music. It was no longer just a gathering of the elite. It had become a shared space of admiration and respect, a reminder that talent and courage could shine regardless of circumstance. The young waitress felt the weight of the moment, understanding that she had made an impression that would linger long after the evening ended. The millionaire, observing her composure and the audience's response, realized that he had underestimated the power of authenticity and dedication. He had assumed control, expected humiliation, and sought amusement at someone else's expense. Instead, he had witnessed a demonstration of skill, heart, and courage that could not be overshadowed by status or wealth. It was a lesson he would not soon forget, and a reminder that true admiration is earned, not assumed. The young waitress, having stepped away from the piano, allowed herself a moment to breathe deeply and absorb the experience. She had shared her gift, faced scrutiny, and earned respect without compromise. The applause, the murmurs of admiration, and the visible awe of the guests were tangible acknowledgments of her courage and talent. She had transformed a moment intended for ridicule into a triumph, not for the sake of recognition, but because she had trusted in her abilities and embraced the opportunity to express herself fully. The evening continued, but the memory of the performance lingered in every corner of the hall. Guests spoke quietly among themselves, reflecting on the unexpected brilliance they had witnessed. The millionaire, now fully aware of the impact of his assumptions and actions, stood quietly, absorbing the lesson of humility and respect that had unfolded before him. The young waitress had not only performed, she had left an indelible impression on everyone present, a reminder that talent and heart could not be judged by appearances or wealth. As she moved through the crowd, receiving nods of acknowledgement and subtle words of praise, the young waitress felt a quiet satisfaction that was deeper than applause or recognition. She had faced a challenge, shared her passion, and emerged with integrity and grace. The room, transformed by her music, had borne witness to a moment of genuine connection, admiration, and respect. And in that shared experience, she had proven, most importantly to herself, that courage, skill, and authenticity could shine brightly, even in the most unexpected circumstances. The young waitress stepped back from the piano, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and quiet wonder. The grand hall, once filled with laughter and chatter, now hummed with a reverent energy. Guests were still murmuring to one another, exchanging glances of admiration, their earlier skepticism completely replaced by genuine appreciation. The atmosphere had transformed from a social display of wealth and status to a space of shared respect for talent, courage, and authenticity. It was a moment that would linger in memory far longer than any luxury or decoration could. The millionaire, still standing near the marble pillar, looked at her with a newfound sense of humility. He had intended the evening to showcase his power and amuse his friends at someone else's expense. Yet he had been utterly wrong. In a few minutes, the young waitress had captured the attention and admiration of everyone present. Her music had spoken louder than any words, transcending social barriers and revealing a talent that could not be judged by wealth or appearance. The realization brought a quiet reflection. He had underestimated the power of skill and the heart that drives it. Guests slowly began to approach her, offering congratulations in soft tones and polite smiles. They did not crowd or push, but their recognition was sincere. Some spoke of being moved to tears by the delicate passages. Others commented on the complexity and precision of her performance. The young waitress received these acknowledgments with modesty, offering gentle nods and small smiles, aware that the praise was not about her ego but about the music she had shared. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a quiet validation of years of dedication and silent effort. The millionaire finally stepped forward, this time with a careful, respectful demeanor. "I must admit," he said, his voice softer and less commanding than before, "that I did not expect such talent or such courage. What you have shown tonight is remarkable." The words were sincere, lacking any trace of mockery. For the first time that evening, he had truly acknowledged someone not for their social standing but for their ability and heart. The young waitress nodded politely, grateful for the acknowledgement but not seeking to prolong the moment. She had performed because she loved music, not for validation. The string ensemble, inspired by her performance, resumed playing softly in the background, adding subtle harmonies that complemented the lingering emotions in the room. Guests listened with attentive silence, savoring the continuation of the music. Some discreetly wiped tears from their eyes, overwhelmed not by the luxury surrounding them, but by the unexpected beauty and emotion that had filled the space. The waitress moved quietly among them, her modesty and grace drawing more admiration than any display of wealth or confidence could have. As the evening progressed, the young waitress noticed that conversations had changed. Guests who had previously engaged in shallow social chatter were now discussing the performance, sharing their thoughts on its complexity, the emotions it evoked, and the courage it took to play under such pressure. The room, once a stage for status and influence, had shifted into a space where respect and appreciation for genuine talent mattered more than anything else. The young waitress, though still humble, felt a sense of belonging that had little to do with her social position and everything to do with her abilities and authenticity. The millionaire observed quietly, processing the events. He reflected on how easily he had assumed superiority based on wealth and social status. He realized that true admiration could not be commanded or manipulated. It had to be earned through skill, courage, and honesty. Watching the young waitress handle the situation with composure and dignity, he felt a subtle shift within himself. Humility, something he had rarely experienced, began to take root. It was a lesson learned not through instruction, but through witnessing someone transform a moment intended for ridicule into a display of artistry and grace. Some of the guests discreetly offered small tokens of recognition. A kind word here, a congratulatory handshake there. The young waitress accepted them with quiet gratitude, aware that the gestures were sincere, unlike the superficial flattery often exchanged in social circles. She moved among the crowd with ease, sharing smiles, brief words, and polite nods. Each interaction reminded her that talent and courage could create connections far deeper than social status, and that humility could command more respect than arrogance ever could. As the night continued, the young waitress found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She remembered long evenings spent practicing alone, the small victories and quiet disappointments, the dedication that had been entirely her own. The performance had not been about proving herself to anyone but had instead been an opportunity to express something deeply personal. Yet, in doing so, she had touched the hearts of everyone in the room, including the millionaire who had initially sought to mock her. She felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had remained true to herself and her art. The millionaire, finally, approached her once more. His demeanor completely changed from the arrogant figure he had been at the start of the evening. "I underestimated you," he said, his voice carrying genuine respect. "Tonight, you've shown what true talent and courage look like. I hope you know how impressive this was." She smiled softly, acknowledging the compliment without letting it inflate her pride. The moment was not about ego. It was about recognition for the authenticity and skill she had shared. Guests continued to express their admiration throughout the evening. Some quietly whispered to one another about the courage it took to play under such scrutiny, while others discussed the subtle emotional depth conveyed in the music. The young waitress felt the weight of the moment, understanding that she had not only performed, but also inspired a room of people to appreciate art and courage over status and appearances. It was a rare and powerful experience, one that would remain with her and with the audience long after the night ended. As the party gradually began to wind down, the young waitress moved back to the piano briefly, her fingers brushing the keys gently, as if saying a quiet goodbye to the instrument that had helped her express so much. The soft notes lingered in the air, a subtle echo of the performance that had captivated the room. The guests watched silently, understanding without words that this was a moment to remember, a rare display of talent and heart that had left a profound impression on everyone present. By the end of the evening, the young waitress had earned more than applause. She had earned respect, admiration, and a sense of personal triumph that transcended recognition or reward. The millionaire, humbled by the experience, had learned a valuable lesson about the power of humility, the limits of arrogance, and the profound impact of authentic talent. The guests, previously focused on social hierarchy and appearances, had witnessed the undeniable truth that skill and courage could command attention and admiration in ways that wealth alone never could. The young waitress quietly left the grand hall, her heart light and her spirit elevated. She had faced fear, judgment, and expectation, and had emerged with grace, composure, and the knowledge that her dedication and passion were more than enough to make a lasting impact. The applause, the whispered admiration, and the respect she had earned would stay with her, a reminder that courage, skill, and authenticity could shine even in the most unexpected circumstances. That night, she had not only shared her music, but had also created a moment of transformation for everyone who had witnessed it, leaving a legacy of inspiration, respect, and heartfelt admiration.